Okay, let's talk about was and were. They're two tiny words, but man, they can be confusing, right? They can trip up even people who've been speaking English for years. But don't worry, we're going to make it all make perfect sense, right here, right now.
So I bet you've heard this before. Maybe you've even said it yourself. If I was you. It just kind of rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? It sounds fine, but is it actually correct? This little sentence is the perfect place for us to jump in.
Because, if you look in a grammar book, this is what you'll see. If I were you. So what gives? Why on earth would a singular subject like I suddenly use a verb that looks plural? That's the big mystery we're about to solve.
But before we get into the weird stuff, let's just back up a second and start with the absolute basics. Was and were are simply the past tense of the verb to be. That's it. We use them to talk about things that are over and done with. I was tired yesterday, or they were at the party last week. Easy peasy.
Okay, so let's get into the main rule. And honestly, most of the time, this is all you're gonna need. Choosing between was and were is usually just a simple matter of checking if your subject is singular or plural. Let's break it down.
It's pretty straightforward. For singular subjects, I, he, she, it, the dog, you use was. For plural subjects, we, they, the dogs, you use were. But here's the one that catches people, you. It doesn't matter if you're talking to one person or a whole crowd, you always gets were. It's always you were right and never ever you was right.
Now, what about a word like everybody? That feels plural, doesn't it? I mean, it's talking about a bunch of people. But here's a little grammar quirk. Words like everybody, somebody, anyone, they're actually treated as singular. So you have to say everybody was late.
All right, so you've got the main rule down. Simple enough. But now, let's talk about the exception. This is the one that causes all the trouble, and it gets us back to that "if I were you" sentence. We're diving into something called the subjunctive mood.
I know subjunctive mood sounds super fancy and complicated, but it's not. All it really means is that we're talking about stuff that isn't real. It's the grammar of wishes, daydreams, and what-if situations. And when we step into that imaginary world, the normal rules of grammar, well, they bend a little.
Here is the perfect example. When you say, "if I were rich," that little word "were" is like a secret code. It's telling everyone, hey, just so you know, I'm not actually rich. This is just a hypothetical, a fantasy. You're not talking about the past. You're imagining a different present.
Let's put these side by side so you can really see the difference. If you say, "she looks as if she is rich," you're saying it's a real possibility. Hey, maybe she is. But if you say, "he talks as if he was rich," or, to be more formal, "were rich," you're basically hinting that he's putting on a show. You know he's not actually rich. You're pointing out that it's an unreal situation. That's the subjunctive doing its job.
Okay, so we've covered the main rule and that tricky subjunctive mood. Now let's just quickly see how this all works when we're asking questions or making negative statements. And don't worry, this part's a piece of cake. To ask a question, you just flip the verb and the subject. She was right becomes was she right? Easy. And for negatives, you just add not. But in real-life conversations, we almost always just squish them together to make wasn't and weren't. He wasn't listening. We weren't ready. See? Totally straightforward. All right, that was a lot, I know. So let's just zoom out and boil it all down into a super simple checklist you can use anytime you get stuck. This will make it really easy to remember. So next time you're unsure, just run through this in your head. First, check the subject. Is it one thing or more than one? That'll give you the right answer like 90% of the time. Second, check the situation. Are you talking about reality or is it a what-if daydream? If it's a daydream, you use were. And third, just flip it for a question or add "and" for a negative. That's it. That's the entire system.
So there you have it. You know the former rules now. But here's a final thought, and it's the really interesting part. Language isn't some dusty old rulebook, right? It's alive. It changes. So as you go about your day, just listen. Listen to songs, watch movies, pay attention to how people actually talk. You're probably going to hear "if I was you" all over the place. Now that you know the formal rule, you get to make a choice. But noticing how it's used in the real world, well, that tells you a whole lot more about how language really works. Happy listening.